Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of FNR Ask the Expert. So, over the last few months, we've talked a lot about species of animals you may find in your property, such as frogs and toads and snakes and turtles and all those things. But today, we're going to be talking about another water related species, but this time we're going to be talking about vegetation, specifically pond vegetation. What is it? Why is it useful? How can you prevent negative effects from these aquatic plants? And what can you do to control them if you do have some problem plants? So we're joined today by Illinois Indiana Sea Grant Fisheries Specialist and Associate Professor of Aquatic Sciences, Mitch Zischke, as well as Fred Whitford from the Purdue Pesticides Program. So in addition to offering you the latest cutting edge information on pond vegetation, our experts are going to be answering all of your burning questions throughout the broadcast. So make sure and put those down below in the comments section and we'll get to them as time allows. So to get us started, Mitch, what exactly is aquatic vegetation? Let's start there.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good place to start, and that'll give us a bit of time for a few questions to trickle in. I know it can be a burning topic this time of year as things get warm and these plants start growing. Um, I just run through quickly, what plants are and what they do in ponds and why they're important and why they can be problematic. And so this is just a quick little diagram that shows the pond ecosystem. Plants and algae are an important part of that ecosystem. And really, what they do is during the day they use sun to photosynthesize to get their energy, and that's good because it adds oxygen to the water. Plants can be one of the main ways that oxygen's added to the pond, and so they use nutrients and sunlight to do that. And then at night time, when the sun disappears, plants actually breathe like we do, and instead of adding oxygen to the water, they start using oxygen out of the water, and that can be important for when plants get really abundant, they can actually use quite a bit of oxygen in that pond as well. And so there are good plants and bad plants in ponds and lakes. A lot of vegetation is really important for habitat for fish and for insects and invertebrates. A lot of people want to have great fish in their ponds, but they want to have no plants as well. And that can be really tricky because those fish need those plants and stuff like that. So plants can be really beneficial. They provide shelter, they provide food, but then plants can also be bad. And when they get really out of control, like this photo here, you can see it becomes difficult for us to use the pond. They get really dense, they can actually choke out some of the fish and make it difficult for fish to find food and to eat food. And so when we don't really want to get in a situation like this. And there are a lot of things that we can do to prevent getting here in the first place. But if we do end up here, there are things that we can do to try and treat that and bring it back to what it
Mitch,
was.
if we could, on this specific one, it's not too far from my house, and I've been there a couple of times. And for the listeners out there, when you let things get this bad, man, it's just about impossible to clean this up, Mitch. And when you're out there, you'll see it. It smells. I can't put a boat into it. Obviously, I'm not going to swim into it. It's got limited value for wildlife, and so I guess this is where we don't want to be, which is why I'm sure you're going to talk about doing some work early in the spring, because it's a whole lot easier. Just like you and I, if we get sick and we're guys, we only go to the hospital after we're about to fall over dead. But it's a whole lot easier if we go take care of the problem early on than going there when we're in bad shape. And it's the same thing with these kinds of water bodies, because this is what they will all look like eventually if we don't do something.
Exactly. And I think understanding how to prevent this and then understanding how to treat situations like this, it is really underpinned by understanding what plants need, so nutrients, light, and then also understanding the different types of plants, and there are different things that we can do to the different types of plants that we have. And so aquatic vegetation can sort of be grouped in four main groups. The first one of those is algae. And so you might be familiar with some of this. It can be microscopic, like you can sort of see here on the left. So it's just this green, soupy, cloudy water. A lot of this microscopic plant material is really important food for other things in the pond. We have filamentous algae, so this is where the cells start stringing together in these long filaments, and they can create these mats on the pond, like you see in this photo here in the center. And then we also have some larger algae that actually look a lot like plants, but they're actually not plants. And so an example of that that's common in ponds and lakes is Chara. And the reason why it's important to know this is that we would treat this Chara like it was algae. And if you treat it with something that's used for plants like pondweeds, it actually won't work. And so it's important to know that this Chara is actually a type of algae, not a plant. We then have submerged vegetation. These are all true plants now. So pondweeds, milfoil, coontail, these are all things that are attached to the bottom of the pond with roots, and then they grow up through the water column. These provide excellent fish habitat. They provide important food, but they can also choke out the water in some situations. Some vegetation floats, and some of this floating vegetation is rooted to the bottom, like water lilies or water shield, and then they have stems that grow up to the top and the plant floats. Or they can be free floating, and so there are a couple of different types of plants. There's duckweed and watermeal. Both of these are tiny, tiny little green plants that floats on the surface and can make your pond look just like this. And here you can see actually how small these plants are. And so they require...
On that particular one, the folks that are looking at that, this is the difference why if you can't identify something, there's no sense. You need to get this identification, because for a lot of people would look at that and call it algae because it looks like an algal bloom. It looks like I've covered it. But what I use to control algae is a whole lot different than this duckweed, because this duckweed is a real plant, right, as you suggested. So this identification is like in no other area. If you don't know what these things are, then the chemicals are expensive if we use chemicals, and if we use them against the wrong things, we've wasted the money. But this is a good example of visually, it looks like algae, but if you look at it real close, it looks like it is duckweed.
Yeah, exactly. And identification is really, really important. And then the last group of plants here are the emergent vegetation. These are things that grow on the water's edge, like cattails, phragmites, water willow. I'm sure many of the people tuned in here are going to be familiar with these. They sort of occur right in between that sort of land-water interface. Once again, important habitat for various things, but they can grow out of control and make it difficult to access your pond. So they're just some, a broad overview of what plants are, what they do in the pond, and we can dive in here more into how we go about managing them.
So Mitch, I'm going to stop you there for a second. So you kind of gave us a broad overview of these, but how do I identify them? Are there apps that can help me? Publications, are there field guides, things like that? How do I know what I actually have if I can't just call you up?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are apps. We know there are apps now that help you identify, land plants, house plants, vegetables, trees. And there definitely are some apps for aquatic vegetation, although they're not as comprehensive as some of the apps for trees and that sort of thing. I would say the best thing to do if you're interested in learning about plant ID is to get yourself a good ID guide. We have some basic ID guides as part of Purdue Extension that can give you an idea of some of the types of plants and how to identify them. But for aquatic plants, there are some more detailed ID guides as well that you can get. I think Fred's holding up one of the resources we have here at Purdue.
Wendy, this is just one that the people that we train is called Aquatic Pest Management, and inside of it we have some of the more common weeds that you would see. I shouldn't call them weeds. We're going to do what Mitch says, aquatic plants. But the other one that's pretty useful is wherever you're buying your chemistries from. These would not be chemistries that I would be, if we go there, that I'm going to be just ordering offline. I want to get a supplier. So Mitch, one of the things that a lot of the people who are good, that are not your just standard, here's the chemical, goodbye, they will actually identify these things for you, and by you having pictures. And then the other one here at Purdue is you can actually send in samples. And I think, Wendy, you have to the plant diagnostic lab, you can actually send in, I think it's $16 or $15 or something like that for their ID. But it's the people that if you decide to go with chemistries, whoever's selling it to you should be well enough versed on it. And if they can't, then you're buying your products from the wrong person. So because it's the key, right, Mitch? It's the key.
It is the key.
Everything else depends on that ID in terms of the value of the plant. Is it good for wildlife? Is it going to spread very quickly? As an invasive? Does it have any food value? How is it going to impact my pond for swimming, fishing, right? Everything falls back on that ID, more
Yeah.
important than any other area that I work in.
Yep. And there's, and we'll get into some of the management mechanisms here in a bit, but some people like to go in and try and mechanically rip out stuff, right? Sort of like cutting your lawn with a lawnmower. And some aquatic plants that works well for, but some of them that actually makes the problem worse because they grow from all those little fragments that you create. And understanding, being able to identify stuff allows you to sort of select the appropriate management you need. And so I would say there are some guides that can help you educate yourselves and have some resources on hand, but working with a professional, an extension educator in your county, some of these chemical suppliers, they can definitely help you get a positive ID before you sort of go off and look to apply chemicals or do other things.
Mitch, can you follow up with the cattail? You brought that up because everybody thinks we can hand hoe, hand pull, rake, cut, and for some things we can, but can you pursue that with cattail? So, I can go into a cattail, lilies, most of this stuff, and I can pull out tons of material. But can you follow up on that? Why that is going to take a lot of work over lots of years?
Yeah, so cattails and a lot of these emergent plants are actually perennials, and they have a really complex root system that's called a rhizome. But basically what happens is if you go in there and cut off or try and rip out a lot of these plants, you're basically taking the green leafy structure out, but those roots are still there, and next year they'll grow back just like they were the year before. And so those perennial plants can be tricky to manage, and you might need to use a couple of different approaches to really get on top of them.
So you basically said they're like dandelions. I can mow
Yeah,
dandelions and they just keep coming back.
exactly.
I mean,
Yep.
something like that. All right.
They don't taste as good as dandelions, I don't think, but
So I guess, Mitch, that leads to our next point is not all aquatic vegetation is bad. As you mentioned, some of them are positive in feeding our fish populations. Some of them can actually provide nutrients to our ponds. So, and Fred even mentioned purchasing some of these plants to put in. Some of them obviously just show up on their own thanks to our wildlife friends. So how do I know if it's good or bad?
yeah, that's a great question. I would so if you go to any pond, whether you dug it or whether it's a retention pond on the side of the road, there's going to be some vegetation in there, and the type of vegetation that establishes depends on the type of sediment in the pond, whether it's clay or soft or rocky or something like that. And I would say pretty much most vegetation is useful in low quantities. Like all of these vegetation, they provide habitat, they provide food, but some are better than others. So I would say that things that root down to the bottom are important for stabilizing the sediment, preventing erosion. They could be really helpful to keep your water clear. And they're the ones that also provide really good habitat for fish. Things like algae or other things that are floating around don't really perform that same function because they're not stabilizing anything and they are more prone to clogging things up. So some of those pond weeds can be really, really useful. Emergent vegetation, while these cattails and things can be problematic in some areas, these emergent vegetation can help trap nutrients before they come in to the pond, so they can actually help, keep your pond, low in nutrients and low in vegetation, and they can help stabilize the bank too, so they can be really useful. I think, but any of these types of vegetation that are useful in some cases can grow out of control and become problematic too. And so I wouldn't, there's not a list of 5 good types and 5 bad types. It's really the situation. And once again, it comes back to that ID, and it comes back to maybe working with a professional, someone to talk through some of these things.
So Mitch, that's I think your point here is, as we try to get people to be on the same page with this, is I don't want a pond that's a bathtub.
Well, some people might. If you want your pond,
that's me. That's me. I'm just
yeah.
I don't want a bathtub because I want some plants, because some plants are good for everything, right? But some people might like a bathtub. I wouldn't. I want some plants because plants can be beneficial. But your point, Mitch, is pretty important. All of these plants, if we let them go beyond to the extremes can be bad. A few plants is good, lots of plants, Bobby the cattail being the best examples, or lily, then you can see then that good then becomes bad because it just chokes out everything else.
Yeah.
So in moderation.
I would say the one exception to that rule is there are definitely some aquatic plant invasive species that we want to keep an eye out for. Things like Eurasian milfoil, purple loosestrife as an emergent. Those things, we want to prevent them from coming in, and we want to minimize their spread. So if you do see those in your pond, then that's something you might want to look to get treated, and definitely want to not spread those elsewhere. But apart from those invaders that we want to get rid of or minimize, everything else, is good in, it's a little bit like ice cream, it's good in small amounts, but you don't want to eat too much.
Well, I think we would disagree on that too, Mitch, but that's another, that's why I'm heavy and you're not, so.
Well, another thing that, a lot of people may agree or disagree on is how to do this. What is your pond actually for? Are you looking for prevention? Are you looking to alter the habitat for the wildlife you have there? How do I control it? There's obviously, very different methods for that as well. So I guess it all starts with a management plan, right, Mitch? If you need to know what your plan is for your pond before you know what aquatic species may be helpful to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on this in past videos, but a plan, understanding your goals and having a plan for those is key. Your goals are not the goals your neighbor has, or not, they're your goals, and it's important to be honest with what you want to use the pond for. If you want to use it primarily for swimming, you have a nice dock, sandy beach, you want it pretty clear, and you might not want many plants in there. But if you want to use it for fishing, then you need to, understand that some plants are beneficial for those fish. Another thing that we see a lot of is people who want these bright green, beautiful lawns right up against their pond. They're dumping fertilizer on their lawns to make them look great, but they also want a crystal clear pond. And if you dump fertilizer on your lawn, it's going to end up in your pond, and you're going to end up with a bright green pond as well. And so understanding your goals are important for all pond management, but also for plants. And they can also help you decide on some of the best management strategies, whether or not you want to use chemicals, or maybe try other things before you get to chemicals, and so set your goals, and then also get out there and keep an eye on your pond, because you want to, if you can catch some of these things before they become a problem, that makes your job a lot easier.
Mitch, do we have time for me to share that video so we could put some of that into a video? Is that okay?
I think so. Wendy, is that okay?
Wendy, I guess you're the boss, so Wendy will let me try to share it so we can put some of what Mitch said into a video, if we can make it work. And we have these videos, and I think it's the site has been put up for you. We're just going to get a snippet of it here so you can kind of see. Goes to a site to evaluate a pond.
One of the obvious things now, we got this pond, and are we fixed to make a visit around the edge, some of it?
Absolutely. So right off the bat, I've noticed some brittle naiad up here, which is pretty standard for this pond.
Okay.
And I try to keep the beach areas or the active areas clean. And as we turn the corner, there's a little bit more. And then right here is some American pondweed.
So you notice he's calling these out by name.
You're going to capture a picture of?
Absolutely. I do it very passively. Just drive by real quick.
Okay. Now that can be a good plant or a bad weed?
It can be evasive if you let it go.
Okay.
Some aquatic life likes to eat it, and frogs tend to like to sit on it if they can,
okay,
like little ones. Now, if you notice here, there's a lot of stagnation on the surface.
Yeah.
You can see the lack of a better term, the scum of the water. It's just a slight sheen of particulate. And that is just basically due to lack.
Well, we don't need to go any more than that, but if the point was, Mitch, that is part of your plan. You got a beach, this particular pond they're using for fishing. He's been able to identify the plants by specific plants. he knows if they're good or bad based on what they do for wildlife or if they're invasive. But that's the key things when you to know your pond in terms of what you want to do, and that tells you basically what some of your management tactics are.
Yeah, I think you know, I call it just keeping an eye on things, but actively going out there and walking around your pond, in the spring, through the summer, so you can identify what's happening. If you're interested in water quality or algae, you can take water samples and have those tested regularly. So not only does that allow you to see what's happening, to see what's there, to see things changing, but it also allows you to see if you've had any results from any management you do. If you walk around and you've got a bunch of filamentous algae in one part of your pond, and you go ahead and treat that with something, then a few weeks later, if that's gone, you've had an effect, and so I think there's a lot of different benefits for walking around and getting a good handle on what's happening in your pond.
So, Mitch, I was talking to some applicators actually yesterday, and what they do is depending on what they contract with the pond owner, they're going out every 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So if to back up what you're saying, if I'm going to manage my own pond and do my own work, we're suggesting every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and then to see what's growing, what it is that you've controlled, how things are changing, so you can readapt or adapt to what's changing. But every 2 to 4 weeks would be a good time to visit that pond.
Yeah, and hopefully you're getting out there that frequently using the pond anyway. So.
And just a reminder, if you have questions about your personal pond or plant management issues you have, put those in the comment section here on Facebook. And if you're watching this in archive, go ahead and leave them on there, and we will have Mitch and Fred get to you after the fact. But moving on, so now I know I have aquatic plants, some of which I want, some of which I don't. We've talked about what are the things I can prevent getting some of the ones that maybe aren't on my A list. Let's start there.
Sure. So I'll just share my screen again. I'll just talk a little bit about, plant management. Once we realize, what we've got, what we want, and once we realize what we've got, what do we do from here? And typically, plant management is all about, preventing or getting rid of plants because, like I said, they typically naturally establish pretty easy. Definitely, if you've dug a new pond, you might want to plant some shoreline vegetation or whatever. But typically, we're looking to get rid of stuff or prevent it from coming in the first place. And so there are a number of different things that we can do. I typically like to think there are 5 steps or 5 tools that we have for aquatic plant management. And the first step is really prevention. And so I mentioned earlier that the 2 or 3 things that plants need are sunlight, nutrients, and then something to attach to or put their roots into. And there are things that we can do. If we can alter or change some of those characteristics in our pond, we can prevent those plants growing. And so a big one is nutrients. Typically ponds in Indiana and ponds in the Midwest have a lot of nutrients coming into them. Might be from ag fields, from lawns, from golf courses, or you might just have a lot of leaf matter and stuff coming into your pond causing a lot of nutrients. And so if we can, they're fueling that plant growth. And so if you can, try and prevent some of those nutrients, maybe apply less fertilizers. Down here, you'll see this is what we call a buffer strip. This is basically a line of vegetation on land next to the water. They'll help trap some of those nutrients. Anything you can do to prevent nutrients coming into your pond is going to do wonders for slowing down some of that aquatic plant growth. It's really great for preventing algal blooms and it's great for preventing some of these other species to grow out of control as well. And so, that's really the first step. And you might have to combine this with some other techniques, but prevention is going to go a long way in helping your plant sort of situation in your pond.
Mitch, if I live in an area, let's say we're talking about regular ponds, but people view these retention ponds as a pond as well. And if you notice that this could be pretty hard because a lot of the materials coming off the road on these retention ponds, right? They got a pipe coming right in, and that makes it that prevention then may not be something that you can do on everything. Another example, or maybe some of the folks here have got horses, or they've got cattle, or they got goats. we have a lot of places where that all that manure and urine is just being washed into the pond. And again, how, can you change it? Maybe, maybe not. But you just got to understand that some of this stuff will require you to make some changes if you can prevent it, which makes life a whole lot easier. But sometimes you can't, Mitch. Sometimes that's just the way it was built and set up, and there's not much I can do.
Yeah. And the same goes for people who might have a pond on their property, but most of the water going into that pond's flowing from their neighbor's property, and they can't really control what their neighbor does. But, if you have a fairly specific area of your pond where the water's coming in, you can do things like allow, vegetation to grow on the bank there. Even if it's in that one spot, you might not be able to access the pond in that one spot. That can still trap a lot of those nutrients and have some impact on your pond. But if that's the case, you might need to look at some of these other options.
Because if you think about an ag, that's why when you drive down the road and you look in farm field, you'll see grass strips going through these waterways, grass strips up against creeks and rivers, because those grass strips slow the water, allows it to percolate, and the sediment and the nutrients stay right there. So that is actually an important component, maybe in habitat alteration. I'm not sure if that's where it would fit, or as prevention, or both. You habitat change it to do the prevention, but a grass buffer strip is very useful in your world. Is that true?
Yeah, buffer strip of any vegetation. Grasses are good, shrubs are good. They not only help stabilize the sediment to prevent muddy ponds, but they also trap a lot of those nutrients. And I guess, on that note, I will say that, I don't have it on the slide here, but, if you could add aeration to your pond, a lot of people think of aeration to help with the fish and to help prevent fish kills. But when you have a pond that's got a lot of oxygen in it through aeration, that can actually help some of the processes that break down organic matter. And so you might be able to limit some of the plant growth you have with that aeration as well. And then there are other things you can do, like you can add plastic liners or riprap or other things to prevent plants taking root in the bottom of the pond. You can add blue dyes or dyes to the water to prevent the light filtering down and prevent plant growth. So there are a few other things that you can do. They start to get a little bit more expensive, but if you want to try and prevent those plants growing in the first place, these are just a few options that you have.
Mitch, if I could, we want to make sure that folks that are listening, there's all kind of dyes to color up the water. They are all illegal to use. The ones that are legal to use is called Aqua Shade. It is a specific product that it goes to a pond, EPA registered. It has instructions. And so if you're going to use a dye, you want to use the Aqua Shade to be legal. And the reason why is something you brought up earlier. All the plants that are in the water, as you suggested, need light, correct?
Yeah, for the most part, yep.
Yep. So when you put the blue dye over it, what it does, it prevents a lot of that sunlight from penetrating through, and so that the plants that are in the water are basically going to starve to death because they can't photosynthesize. So that is an option if you like blue water. I don't like blue water. It's just not natural to me, but a lot of people do. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but you're using the blue dye, but that blue dye would be what you probably would, if the plants were emerged, if they were already emerged, would the blue dye do anything for me?
No, so the blue dye is going to mostly do your submerged plants, your algae. It's not really going to hit your emergent stuff like cattails, and it's not really going to impact the floating plants like lilies or duckweed or anything like that.
Sure.
So Mitch, the next step, if the habitat alteration and the prevention don't fix my problem or prevent my problem, I should say, then what's next?
Yeah, so I think of these as sort of like the proactive steps. How do I try and minimize things to begin with? Then if that doesn't work and I end up with some problematic plants, then you sort of move into that reactive space where you need to try and control things. And there are three main ways that we can control aquatic plants. Mechanical removal, so we can physically rip them out. This works well for some plants and not others. Like I said, if for things like cattails and lilies, if you take the tops off them, they're just going to grow back. Some plants like filamentous algae and some pondweeds as well, when you break them all up, new plants will grow from each of those pieces, and so that's not great. But where this can be useful is it can help clear areas. If you want to clear a certain area to swim or to put a boat in, that can be useful. It can also help remove a lot of that biomass from your pond. So if you go and kill off all these plants and leave that material in there, it can cause low oxygen. And so you might want to take a lot of that material out first before you use chemicals or other things. So we can pull stuff out. It takes a lot of work, and it's sort of an ongoing process, a little bit like mowing your lawn. There are some animals that we can use to help us out, and so grass carp, this top image here, you can buy these. These are you need to buy them from a licensed hatchery. They will go and eat pondweeds for us. They don't eat things like cattails. They typically don't eat algae very much, but they can help us with those pondweeds. Another fish is tilapia, this one down the bottom here. You've probably eaten tilapia if you've bought it at the grocery store. You can also buy these to stock in your ponds, and they'll do a really good job eating algae and filamentous algae. The downside for tilapia is when the water gets cold, they die. And so it's great. They can grow pretty big in 1 year and you can harvest them to eat. But if you don't take them out, they'll die. They'll add a lot of nutrients to the pond, and then you could have more issues down the road.
Mitch, in your standpoint, from the ecological, from the environmental system, can these things escape to my ponds and cause me problems elsewhere?
Yeah, they can. And you want to be careful about using these if your pond has an outflow. In theory, the grass carp are sterile, so they're not supposed to be able to reproduce. However, if you have an outflow, you might decide not to use them in the first place. And tilapia, back in Australia, we have invasive tilapia that are a big problem because it's warm all the time and they can survive in our lakes and rivers and everything. Here in the Midwest, if they escape, they're likely going to die in the wintertime anyway. But that's a great point, Fred. You want to be mindful of whether your pond floods out or whether it flows down to another water body. You might want to be careful with what other species you add in there. And that's the same for some of these chemicals you might add as well.
Sure.
And so I guess the third control strategy is applying chemicals, and we could talk for hours on this topic, and we can definitely answer some questions about this. But I guess a good approach can be actually using some of these methods in combination with each other. So you might do some things to try the prevention side, but you might have some problems you need to address now. So you might do some mechanical removal, then apply some sort of chemical to knock it down, and then that might get you in a place where you can maintain things, with mechanical removal or other things like that.
So you bring up chemicals, and obviously, Fred, you come to us from the Purdue Pesticides Program, so I think this is right up your alley. Talk to us a little bit about pesticide and herbicide usage and how we do that appropriately.
All right, so right off the bat, Wendy, we would not separate it the way most people do, pesticides and herbicides. So in our world, the word pesticide means everything. Weed killers, insecticides, fungicides, everything, bactericides. And so specifically in this area, we would be using weed killers, and we call them herbicides. Or we would be using, and that would be for the plants, Mitch, that called true plants. Your plants that are submerged, plants that are emerged, or plants that float. Those would require your herbicides. And then there's things that we call algicides, and those are the things that's going to kill algae. All right, so that's why it's so important to know, is that an algae that I'll chase with copper, or is that in these other plants, then I will have to use a herbicide. The problem here, Wendy, and I keep going, I know the folks are getting tired of listening to it, it's this plant ID, that just because I use a weed killer doesn't mean it's going to kill the plants I'm chasing. You have to match the right herbicide to the right ID of the plant. If you don't, you've just wasted hundreds of dollars. Okay, so that's the more critical part, is matching the herbicide. And what's different in aquatic environments, uh, let's say most of them would be familiar putting out a fertilizer or something on your turf, or a herbicide on your turf. All right, that's you're doing on the ground per 1,000 square feet or whatever it is that you're using. Uh, in most of a lot of this pond work, Wendy, it has to do with not only it's the placement. Do you spray on top? Do you put it in the water, underneath the water? And you have to remember you're spraying not a flat area, but a down so many feet down. So, for instance, if I have a problem, Mitch, at the bottom of a pond, the best way to explain to it, I can take a little bit of sugar in my coffee and it doesn't taste sweet. It takes so much sugar to make it taste sweet. And it's the same thing with these chemicals. I have to have a certain rate in the water to be able to have any effect on these plants. And so that's that volume calculation that you have to be able to do. So right ID, match it to the right type of pesticide, algicide or herbicide, getting the right herbicide for the plant, and then getting out the right rate and making that application. I mean, those are more important than actually what I mean, that's in essence what we try to do to get good control.
Yeah, I mean that there's some great points, and absolutely, the using the right product for the right job and applying it in the right dosage is really important. And Fred mentioned this earlier with the dyes, but you want to use products that are approved for use in aquatic systems. And you should be buying these registered approved products. They'll have labels that give you all sorts of information about how to apply it, what rate to apply it, what considerations, like how long do you need to wait until you drink the water or you eat the fish or something like that, and the sorts of protective equipment you might need to do when you apply it too. And so definitely the old saying, measure twice, cut once. I think with these chemicals you want to read the label twice before you think about doing anything, because they're expensive. You don't want to waste them, but you don't want to accidentally kill your fish or make your dog sick or anything like that. So I think that's definitely some consideration. I think that's why a lot of people will reach out to professionals to get some help there too.
So, Mitch, we probably do hundreds of thousands of ponds every year in the state, and we've seldom have any problems at all. And so we can in fact use these products. And I guess what one of the things we can talk about, and there's been some studies, and actually pretty cool studies, that if you weeds, aquatic plants are very good for fish, right? But if they get too thick, then the bluegills get up in there and they get stunted because the fish can't get to them, right? There's this interaction that's necessary there. And so if I can actually kill some of the weeds, I can actually improve fish habitat. All right. If I remove these invasive species like purple loosestrife, I can actually increase the kinds of plants that are around my pond because they're so invasive and they take. So there's lots of benefits, but we have to be careful. And the key thing here is this, Mitch. Cold water holds more oxygen than hot water. So right now, that cold water is loaded with oxygen. But as we move through the season, we get less and less oxygen. Now, you brought up a key point here. If I do things in the early season and I kill the algae or the plants, now's the time to do it, because as those plants die, they decay. And when things decay, they suck up oxygen. Now is the time to do it so that I have maintained the oxygen. And B, the plants are actively growing. They're not as thick and troublesome. If you're going to do something, now is the time to start the process, not in August. because as we push it later into the season, I have less and less oxygen. I have more and more of a problem. And when I kill the weeds, it's so much death. That's what kills the fish. It's that oxygen dropping as an indirect result of killing the weeds.
Mitch, anything you want to add there? I know, Fred gave us a lot of information, and certainly we want to make sure we're doing it the right way, because none of us want to waste any money. And certainly ponds, as we know, and you've mentioned several times on past broadcasts, that they can be a real money suck if you don't know what you're doing properly. And so that's when the experts like you guys come in, right?
Yeah, and Fred makes a great point, that when you kill off your plants, that biomass has got to go somewhere, and it usually sinks, bacteria break it down, and they use up the oxygen. So doing it in small batches, starting in the spring, getting it under control, doing small little kill-offs with some maintenance dosages of the chemical or whatever, not only will that keep your pond looking healthy and usable, it also will prevent the risk of a big kill of plants and potentially a kill of fish. And so, it's sort of, if I went out and waited until August to start mowing my lawn, it's going to be a massive undertaking. And
that's a good example. I mean, that's a good example right there. Why nothing's really different here, except we want early, maintenance. It's the same thing with, if you don't change your oil, but every 4 years, and then you have a problem, then it doesn't do much good at that point. You change your oil, you do that routine maintenance.
Yeah.
Two things that have come up that I've seen over the years, Mitch. One is that the people are going to price these aquatic products, and they're going to say, "Oh my God, these products are very expensive." So what they're going to do is they're going to look at what other products have these active ingredients in it. Roundup being the best example. The aquatic Roundup, though it has glyphosate in it, is not the same as the glyphosate that we put on the ground. And if you use the cheaper on the ground, it's got additives in it that kill the fish. And we've seen that enough times. So the Roundup that goes into water has got different kinds of solvents that have been removed to protect the fish. And the second, I guess, is to ask you your opinion. What's your opinion? We see this a lot on using straw bales to kill things. To algae control, I guess, is what it's. Do you have an opinion on that? I've got old data, but
I've looked into it a little bit. So some people, want to use straw, hay, or barley or something to try and control their algae. And from what I've read, there's not a huge amount of science to support that. And from people trying it out in different avenues, sometimes it works for them, sometimes it doesn't. And so, so I would say that it could, it's a cheap alternative, but I'm not sure that it really works that well. And I haven't seen any data that says, yes, it absolutely works all the time, go ahead and do it. And so usually I'm reluctant to recommend it because, you're potentially adding more biomass to your pond. If it doesn't work, it could actually be fueling some of that growth as well. And so, I typically, get people to try and stick to some of the more proven methods. And there are a lot, there's not just one chemical for algae, right? There are a bunch of different chemicals you can use in different situations. And to touch on your point about chemicals being expensive, some people might see that and go, okay, I'm going to buy some, but I'm going to wait until things are bad to use it once so that I don't have to buy any more. But really, if you start early, you can use less of the chemical throughout the season. It might not end up costing you any more in the long run in terms of dollars, but you end up with a pond that you can use and it's nice and healthy and things like that.
I will use a name that most people may be not familiar with, Carol Limby, who was our retired aquatic biologist here in the botany department. And she had a couple of videos and publications basically saying exactly what you said, Mitch, was the use of this straw is at best is ineffective and inconsistent. So I probably wouldn't put money into that. You can try it, it's your money, but I guess that's what everything I've read is. It's it would be neat if it worked and it was consistent, but it's inconsistent. Now, I'm sure there's people that would disagree with us, but that's what I've seen on the data so far.
Yeah, and I think once you're in this sort of pond management game for a while, you'll see that every pond's different, and some people might get something like that to work, but that doesn't mean it's going to work all the time. And in that case, it actually doesn't work most of the time. And I think it's worthwhile just understanding that your pond's unique, and you'll have to sort of get a keep your finger on the pulse to get an idea of what you can do in your pond.
One of the things we want to talk about is, we're talking about not wasting our money on chemicals, but one of the things I know that's important to you, Fred, and we talk about it in regards to, whether you're going out herping or whether you're going, camping and you're taking wood or things like that, is cleaning your gear. And that's especially important when we're talking about ponds and we're talking about putting boats in and out or equipment in and out and things like that, that we're making sure we're not counteracting our own efforts by not keeping things clean. So you want to talk a little bit briefly about that as we kind of wrap up?
Sure. There's certain plants that you can't keep out of your ponds, and these are what the ducks are bringing in, the herons are bringing in. I mean, okay, that's those plants. That's just natural things that's going to occur. But there's a lot of other plants that when we use our boats and we go to other lakes and we don't clean our boats off, this stuff, pretty hardy stuff, and we put them back and we introduce them into the ponds. So one of the things is, if you're using your boat to go elsewhere, you should really spend some time washing that boat off, checking that motor, checking where these plants are hanging, because they can grow with these little fragments. Or if you let people use your pond, is to make sure that their boats are clean before they go in, because that's how we introduce a lot of different plants into our system that creates the problems that we have to deal with later. I guess that would be a preventative measure, right, Mitch? That you were talking about preventative. That's another thing that we could do to try to slow this down.
Yeah, absolutely. Preventing the spread of these, whether they're a listed invasive species or they're just another species you don't want. Like, preventing those spreads are important, and the boat issue is definitely an important one. A lot of these smaller ponds where you might not be using boats, if you've got friends coming over with their muck boots, or say you borrow a rake from your friend to pull out some of your weeds, make sure you clean that stuff off, and even better, let it dry out completely for a few days before you then move it to another water body, because that'll, that way you won't have any chance of spreading those. And you can always try asking the geese and the duck to wash their feet before they come into your pond if you like, but I don't know if they'll listen.
I can't even get my grandson to do that, so I don't know if the ducks would listen to me or not, Mitch. But
well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Fred.
No, I was just going to ask. I'd like to talk about whether you hire somebody or not.
That was going to be my next question. List? You took that right out of my mouth.
Okay, go ahead. Ask your question.
As we wrap up, I wanted to offer people, we've given them a lot of resources along the way here, but if they have a problem, who should they reach out to? What should they do? And what should they or should they not be trying to do on their own?
So a person obviously can treat their own ponds. The herbicides and the algicides that they're buying, 99% of them are not restricted, which means they could purchase them. I would like to see them purchase them from a dealer who understands the work, because you're paying for advice there. You're going to get the advice. The difficult part here that we've talked about, Wendy, is you just think about what we said. Every 2 weeks, we said, you got to know your pond. You got to be able to identify it. The aquatic plants. You have to have the equipment to get out there and actually make the application. Algicides I can do from the bank, but a lot of these require me to and placement and timing and rates. This requires a lot of skill that you can develop. I'm not saying you can't. So if you're one of those people that have an interest in this, then you're going to require to have lots of education. You're going to be self-taught. All right. So nothing there. But if you're one of those that's only going to hit and miss, you're wasting your time by even trying, because consistency is the name of the game. So, that's why it's important that if you are having trouble and you're not being consistent, that you decide to hire a firm That firm will be certified by the state. They will have to follow the label directions, as Mitch said. They are responsible for what they do, the control and any harm that they may do, and they're consistent. They come out every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and so you might decide, and I'm going to throw out a number. Don't anybody hold me to it, but it might cost you $500 to $1,000 a year for your pond. We have services for everything: TV, phones, garbage. You think of, I forgot what we have, like 20 different things that people buy. This may be one of them, depending on how important that pond is. So just make sure that the person is certified, and we can get you to a database with that, because then you know they have insurance, they've passed the test, and they're getting continuing education. Stay away from the fly-by-night people who don't have any of that, because you're just asking for problems there. Did that answer the question or not?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So Mitch, we have a question from the audience. Anne wants to know if adding a pond fountain will help her with algae control. So she's obviously trying to do some of this herself. So can you address that, and what aeration or a pond fountain may do to help the algae control issue?
Absolutely. So a fountain and aeration are different. So a fountain sprays water up into the air, looks really pretty, but it actually doesn't aerate the water very much, because to aerate the water, you actually need like a bubbler from the bottom, bringing, circulating water around the pond. The bottom aeration is the best in terms of helping with plant management, because it keeps your pond really oxygenated, and it can keep some of those bacterial processes going really well, and can prevent growth of plants, but also really promote the breakdown of the things that die. The fountain adds less oxygen to the water, but it adds a little bit, so it's less beneficial to fish and plants than the aerator. The one thing that the fountain will do, and the aerators will do as well, is they move the water around a little bit. So if you have issues with floating plants or filamentous algae, what can happen is the fountain can push those to certain areas of the pond and maybe make it a little easier to treat or scoop out or whatever. So I mean, if you've got a fountain already, that's great. You can definitely use that. But typically, if you're looking to install one, if you're interested in fish and vegetation management, we sort of push people towards the diffusers and the aerators more so than the fountains. I think you can actually get fountains that sort of do both. It looks like a fountain, but it sucks water from the bottom of the pond and also circulates. So hope that answers the question.
But Mitch, always remember, you got to have electricity, I think, even on all these. And people get upset when they realize, okay, I didn't think about that. So to Ann's point, you got to have electricity out there, Ann. And then remember, the winter, you got to do something. There's maintenance by putting these in. There's going to be maintenance issues that you're going to have to deal with, as well as taking care of them during the winter time. So, that's I guess the negative, Mitch, to that is there are some maintenance issues with these aerators and or fountains as well.
And that actually gave us a great opportunity to share a link to Mitch's podcast, Pond University. They actually just did an episode 2 weeks ago about aeration in ponds and lakes. And so I shared that with you. Hopefully, Anne, you have a chance to listen to that in your free time. And I'll also, ironically, or great for you, coming up in June, Mitch and his friends will be talking about algal blooms on the Pond University podcast. So stay tuned for that. We'll have that on our social channels when that's available, and you can certainly tune in and learn more about how to treat algae in your pond. So as we wrap up, I think we've shared a lot of information with people. If you have specific questions about your pond, feel free to email Mitch. His information is on our website, and also Fred, also available on the Purdue website. And just look up the Purdue directory. You can find both of them easily.
Wendy, we might add that everybody there has a local county extension educator. They're people like us, but they work in the county. That they may be an excellent resource for you. Sometimes they will come to your pond and take a look at it, and or there's some specialists out there that can do that. So the county extension educator And we also, maybe we could put a link up for how to find them, but I would think that they would be an excellent source of another pair of eyes to look at what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, thanks to Mitch and his cohort, Jared Brook, you have a handy dandy little way to look those things up. And I've put that in the comment section here on Facebook.
Cool.
To how you just go to there and you put in your county and bam, you know exactly who to call and how to get a hold of them. So thanks to Mitch and Jared for their pond and wildlife management website. So anything else that we missed that people should be looking out for as we're approaching this weekend? I know a lot of people are going to be outdoors and trying to enjoy their ponds, and maybe now is when they're finally realizing that there are issues. So Mitch, Fred, any final comments?
Well, I guess mine is to understand, if you go into this, it's going to be a lot of work. This is not an easy area, a lot of work. So, and it's doable. You just have to, educate yourself and then put in the sweat time and the muscles to make it work. So I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, I guess I would say, ponds, just like forests and grasslands or whatever, they also have a natural succession through the season. So early in the spring, you'll likely see a lot of the filamentous algae and the phytoplankton blooms. Then later in the summer, you get some of those pond weeds growing up. You might, if you're unlucky, you might get some harmful algal blooms as well. And so just understand that there's a progression there. And just because you treat your filamentous algae in the spring doesn't mean you're not going to have other problems in the summer or the fall. The one last thing I just want to mention, and it relates very much to aquatic plant management, is, your pond is a very valuable asset. If you have a pond, if you've built the pond, or you bought a property with a pond, that pond is going to add a lot of value to your property. I think, it can add up to a third of the value to that property. That's if it's a good pond. If it's a bad pond, it can detract value from your property as well. And so, it might take some time. It might cost a little bit of money, and not only do you get to use it, a great resource then, but you can actually be making an investment into your property if you're looking to sell that down the road. So plus I think it's fun, so.
Thank you guys so much for your time and for sharing all of this great information with us. And again, if you're watching this in archive and you have questions that pop up as you look at this, check out the links that we've provided for you. They have all of the resources that Mitch and Fred mentioned. Feel free to reach out to them. Feel free to reach out to your county educator. And we hope that you, cross your fingers, have good pond management season and keep those algal blooms away. So with that, thank you. And we'll be back with Ask the Expert as the summer progresses. So stay tuned and follow our social media for when those are going to occur. So thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Fred.